Hey guys! So this tutorial will be all about metal, specifically the shiny glossy metal. I'm going to be using Copic markers. I'll put all the colors that I used in the description below. I also did a digital version of this, so if you're into doing art on the computer, feel free to check out that tutorial linked in the description below as well. I'm going to be talking about metal and just how it works and lights and texture and all that good stuff, as well as how to draw all of these pictures. So let's get started. Okay, so before I talk about the coloring and my coloring process, I just want to get out of the way the whole concepts and just metal and all of that information first, and then I'll come back to what I'm doing exactly. So if you've seen my Fundamentals of Art series tutorials, you'll probably be familiar with a lot of this stuff, specifically value, form, and texture. If you haven't seen them, I definitely recommend them, and I'll link them in the description below. But basically, metal is all about those three main things: value, form, and texture. Metals can have loads of different textures, and even the same metals can have different textures. So silver can be really shiny and glossy, but it can also be really dull and rough. And it's all kind of like on a really small microscopic level. The more smooth and flat, not necessarily like straight across flat in the large scale sense, like it can be a sphere, but microscopically speaking, the more smooth and flat something is, the higher glossy it can be, the shinier it will be. And the more like concaves and convexes and bumps and unevenness of the object, it will be more rough, it will be duller, and it will be more matte. This tutorial is going to be focusing on glossy metals though. So important thing to remember is that the values of glossy metals are very high contrast, and what that means is the lightest points are very bright and the darkest points are very dark, and they're often right next to each other. Another thing from my Art Fundamentals video, if you watch the form one, I talk about reflected light, which is if an object is on a surface, light will bounce off of that surface and back onto the object, creating kind of this slight glow on the back end of the object. That is not exactly what's happening with metal, shiny glossy metal. It's less of reflected light and more of a reflection. So instead of having just this soft hue of light coming from the surface and onto the object, you're getting the actual like mirrored image onto the metal surface. So depending on where you are and where the object is, it's going to look different everywhere. So if you have something metal at home like a spoon or a pot, I recommend just walking around with it, taking it outside, taking it anywhere, and just look at the changing colors, the changing values, the changing pictures that are reflecting off of the surface of the metal. You'll also probably notice that the shape of the metal determines the shape of the reflection. So if you have a sphere, the reflection isn't going to be perfectly flat. It has to go around the sphere. It has to fit onto the sphere. So if you have a sphere and say you take it outside and there are clouds in the sky and you get this nice reflection back onto the sphere, if it's really glossy, you're going to have the cloud curve around the shape of the sphere. It's not going to be straight across. It's going to be curved. So it's something to keep in mind when you're drawing different shaped metal objects, that not only is there a reflection, but the reflection also reflects the shape of the object. And just as the objects will reflect things around them, they're also going to reflect the colors around them. So even if this metal piece is normally silver or gray in like perfect conditions, if you put it next to something that's blue or orange, it's going to reflect that blue and orange. And continuing with value, you're also going to see something called the terminator a lot more easily on a metal object. I didn't talk about this in my form video, I didn't talk about a lot of things in my fundamentals videos, but just keep in mind that the terminator is the darkest point of the core shadow. It's right up at the edge of it, the closest part to the lightest section of the object. So if you have a sphere and you have that standard like light coming from one side and you have that nice gradual change, the terminator will be right around the center of the sphere. Because it's so high contrast, it's a lot easier to see the terminator on something that's more metallic and glossy. So now I'm just going to talk about what I'm doing really quick with the Copic markers. Now that I've got all that stuff out of the way, what I'm doing here is I'm starting with N0, which is my lightest gray that I have. It's just something that to get a base down so I can kind of see where I want my sphere to be. If you don't have a light color marker, that's totally fine. You can use a pencil and outline a circle, or you can use some alcohol to kind of mark the circle. It's a lot about layering and really blending. You really want to make sure that you're following the shape of the object. So for the spheres, things are going to be more rounded. And for the cone, it's kind of going to be more of a straight line up and down as it follows around the cone. I use neutral, cool, and warm gray colors. Doesn't matter what you use. I find it's easiest for me to start with that neutral 0, add in like one little bit of darker color on top of that, then jump to a more darker color, then jump back to lighter colors to help blend, and just keep jumping back and forth until I get the effects that I want. I add in the black around it just to kind of help me see the sphere better on my page in my book, because the spheres end up being kind of light and my book paper is already pretty white. I also used a white gel pen a few times just to correct some mistakes or add in some extra highlights that were covered up because of the markers. But you could also use acrylic paint too as well for that, or anything else that you have available. Now with Copic markers, because it's a traditional medium, we don't have the same advantages in terms of layering and editing as you do with digital medium, that it's more important for us to plan ahead what the picture is going to look like. So for my color example, I needed to know which colors I was using, where stuff was going. I also wanted to show the reflections of the spheres onto each other, and I also had to plan ahead for that. So I had to leave space for everything to show up. I picked relatively light colors, but you can pick whatever colors you want. I just went with the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. So since they're shiny, glossy metal, they're going to be really reflective. So it's going to really reflect that red surface or the yellow surface or the blue surface. It's also going to reflect the surfaces around them. So I had the leftmost ball reflect a bit of the yellow and a touch of the blue. I had the center ball reflect all three of them kind of evenly. And I had the rightmost one reflect yellow and blue and a tad bit of red. I should have added a bit more, but oh well. And I left space for the other spheres to be reflected on them. And you have to keep in mind the shape of the sphere. I know I keep saying this, but it's important. So the closest spheres, the two closest ones, are having that more rounded, extended oval, like it's squished. I also added a touch of color on the reflection of each of the reflections of the spheres on the spheres. So the little ball reflections, I added a touch of the color on each one of those as well. If you don't have anything readily available, I definitely recommend public domain images or Google Images for just studies. Medieval armor, pots, eating utensils, all that good stuff is great. I'll also have a couple more examples right after this. If you see here in this picture, you'll notice that here, let me get a noticeable brush. Alright, so if you see here, you have the cup like basically perfectly reflected back onto this metal. It's, you know, it's clean, it's shiny, it's very high glossy. The texture is very smooth and flat, so it gets a great reflection. And you can see the teacup on multiple ones, and pretty much everything is bouncing off each other. And that's basically what metal is. It's a mirror. You can even see some of the stuff up here, the rest of like the room. So it's important to keep in mind that it's not just reflected light, it's a reflection, like a mirror. And you can really get the fun stuff like this picture. I picked this one very specifically. You can see that this has a lot of yellow to it. And so this light right here that's getting hit from some light source over here, and just it's that, and it's this surface is reflective, so you get even more of the whole going back and forth thing. So you have this, which reflects here, which then reflects back onto this, which is how you get this yellow right here. And it keeps going back and forth, and that's kind of what makes this a bit fun, but also a bit of a challenge. Just another example here, you can, if you look really closely into like this area right here, you can see the reflection of the road and streets and grass and trees and stuff behind that's like out of frame. So you can actually see stuff that's behind the camera that took the picture because of the whole reflection. It's distorted because of the shape of the metal and how it's curved and going kind of like that. So you're gonna have some distortion there. And then just here's some pictures that I took outside with some of the metal stuff that I own. Just pay attention to this teapot because that's what I'm gonna be talking about. I brought up a knife right here. This knife is also metal. I don't remember what kind, I think it's aluminum. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that they're both shiny and glossy. So you can see that through these two pictures, sorry, they're kind of slightly off, but this knife is reflecting right here. Now notice that it's not the shadow. If you pay attention over here, you'll actually see the shadow of my hand and the knife. So this is not a shadow, this is actually a reflection. And if I turn the knife sideways, well, first of all, you can kind of see what's going on right there, but you also notice that the sun catches, the sun catches the light onto, well, the backside, so it's more like it's kind of the backside of the knife that you can't see, and the light bounced off that, hit here, and you have this nice line of reflection on the teapot. And I did the same thing with the spoon, and if you kind of look, you can see my balcony and some trees around where I live, and the sky right here, and here's the sun, and then here's a little bit of my camera. And then same thing here, it creates that line, and then over here you get that highlight, and it's not the shadow because right here is the shadow of the spoon, so it's not a shadow, you guys gotta remember that. And you can also see me right here in the spoon. Another example of just reflection is right here you have these plants that are very green, and the light is coming from them and hitting right here on the metal, and it's pretty much gonna, you can kind of see like the blue sky a little bit right here. And it's just, even though this metal is pretty dull and it's not like high gloss like the other examples I've been showing, there's a bit more of a rough texture to it, which makes it more of that dull feeling, that dullness of it. It's still going to have reflection to it. Like you can even see right here, like it's kind of everywhere. So that's it. I hope it helped. If you make anything from this tutorial, feel free to link it down below. I would really like to see. And again, if you want to see the digital version of this tutorial, link is in description below. And thanks for watching. Bye!